way it was in Palestine back then. The rabbinic presentation of the rabbis with the popular party, no, that isn't true. It wasn't true episode after episode after episode, where the Maccabees are anti-Pharisaic. The Pharisees oppose the Maccabees. In fact, they get their birth moment from opposing the Maccabees and going over to a Seleucid Greco-Syrian king. It's in the Maccabee books. So why aren't the Maccabee books in the Old Testament of the Jews? Because the Pharisees disapproved of them. So you're a Jew, you're trying to celebrate Hanukkah, and all you know is the Festival of Lights, because that's all you hear about in the rabbinic literature, or dreidels, or potato latkes. But you don't hear about what the Maccabee struggle really was until these days, because it's not in the Jewish Bible. It's in the Christian Bible, which brings us to his question, the Septuagint. Okay, since you know about the Septuagint, what's the Septuagint?
The Greek translation of
Right.
Tanakh. I was just asked the question because you said that the Pharisees put the Bible together in 100 AD.
Their version.
And I thought,
Yes, because the Septuagint, you see, had different books, different translations, and that's why in Christian Bible you have an Apocrypha.
right.
Because the Septuagint and its descendants, the Vulgate Bible of the Roman Church, compiled by Jerome on the basis of the Septuagint and other documents. The Greek writers of the New Testament are using the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek version of the New Testament, and the theory behind it in some apocryphal works is that it was compiled around 200 BC or so, which is probably somewhat true. Septua means 72. Because the theory behind it was 72 Jewish elders, what it takes to make a Sanhedrin, were invited down to Egypt at the time of the Ptolemies. Who are the Ptolemies? How many saw Alexander the Great, the movie, which was the most worst movie that has ever been made in the last 15 years? In fact, people go to it as a cult movie now to laugh at it. It's so horrendous. But in any case, it did have some material in it. Who are the Ptolemies?
One of the four groups that took over after
Alexander died, right. There was one in Greek proper from his normal family. There was one in, I think, Asia Minor, one in Syria, one in Egypt. But anyway, they were the ones in Egypt. They were all generals of Alexander. And the one in Syria was another general called Seleucus. Those are the two main ones that we're interested in. She probably knows it to some extent from other classes and from looking at the book of Daniel, which is very interested in the group in Egypt and the group in Syria. The reason Daniel is so pivotal is that, you see, for the Christians, Daniel is a prophet. And he's supposed to have written what he wrote in the 6th century BC, because where is Daniel mentioned in the Bible? I think he's mentioned in the book of Ezekiel. I think Ezekiel mentions a wise man called Daniel. But in that time, and someone asked me about apocryphal literature. Apocryphal and pseudepigraphic literature. Boy, I'm sorry to waste all this time for you, but maybe you'll clarify how we got to our present situation, which is what I really want to do, and I'm going to try to skim through the other things. Apocryphal and pseudepigraphic. Apocryphal is extra books, additional books. Pseudepigraphic is works under a false pen name. Well, almost all the works we have are under a false pen name. Why would you put a work under a false pen name? Well, it's like getting advertisement, free advertisement. Who's ever heard of you? You're just Joe Schmo. If I can put it under Moses' name, or Adam's name, or Enoch's name. Look at Enoch in the Old Testament. And Enoch walked with God, and he never came back. That's great. I have a vision. I saw I was up in heaven with God. When I was Enoch, I was walking around up there, and I write all my visions under Enoch's name. And that's what pseudepigraphic and apocryphal literature did at this time. So you also have Daniel, which is considered a pseudepigraphic book. There may be an original core, but it accretions onto it. And actually, scholars claim, and you'll have to decide what you think, but I could show you that the book was written in the 2nd century BC. It's actually the last book of the Bible. And it should be considered the last book of the Bible. It's a very recent book. It's written by what we call the Hasidic movement. It's written, the Hasidic movement is detailed for you in what books?
What was that?
The Hasidic movement. You know. The Maccabee books tell you about the Hasidic movement. Hasid in Hebrew means?
Righteous.
No, pious. Zadik is righteous. Hasid is pious.
Pious.
Hesed and Zedek, piety and righteousness. Loving God is piety. Hesed, loving your fellow man, is Zedek, righteousness. The Hesed-Zedek dichotomy, that's what ran through this whole period. Loving God, and then Jesus speaks of it, the two love commandments. So, but Jesus in the New Testament goes further. He's portrayed as going further. There, too, I think the Hellenization occurs. You may think that's uniqueness. It may be. You'll have to decide that for yourself. To me, it isn't. I don't think that he said those things, judging by the behavior of some other people whom we know were descended from his movement or involved in the movement. That is, love your enemies. That was not part of the ethic in Palestine at that time. That's a Hellenistic idea. Herodians actually say it. One of the Herodian kings says, you know, return good for evil. It's in Josephus' works because that's pouring coals on your opponent's head when you do that to him. It was a very Hellenistic sort of behavior pattern. Sort of like Neoplatonism, Socratic ethics. Socrates, remember, wouldn't flee. He wouldn't resist evil, and so on and so forth. Which is not Palestinian, unfortunately. You say, well, yeah, but Jesus made it Palestinian. That's where the crux is. Does the non-resistance to evil, the turning the other cheek, loving your enemy, the love commandment as in advocating paying taxes to Rome, does that help the Pax Romanum or hinder it? To my mind, it's just what the Pax Romanum wants from conquered peoples, which is why the ethic is so successful in the Imperium Romanum. Now, I'm not saying it's not the right ethic. I'm not arguing the value or unvalue. I'm just arguing how Palestinian is this? Do you follow what I'm trying to say? Does it represent Messianism in Palestine in the first century? You say, oh yeah, but that's the uniqueness. Ah, yeah, if I could believe that Paul knew Jesus, I might agree with you. But I know he didn't know Jesus, and that he's only substituting his own supernatural vision of Jesus for whatever Jesus may or may not have been